If you'll click the OK button, that will let us move forward, and we will add the recording tomorrow to our website as well as share it on our social media channels. So as you know, TPC Group has applied to renew their Title V air permit, otherwise known as a federal operating permit, for their petrochemical plant on Park Place Boulevard. They must have this permit in order to continue their operations there. There will be an official public hearing organized by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality about the permit they have submitted. That public hearing will happen on Thursday, the day after tomorrow, April 11th at 7 p.m. at the Raul Izaguirre School for Success on Broadway in Houston. We are hosting this virtual meeting tonight to help community members prepare for Thursday's public meeting. During this webinar, we'll discuss the permit process and the role of the hearing, why this permit is a concern for public health, and how you can share comments and tell your story at the hearing on Thursday. We have three special speakers here tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce them. First, we will hear from Gabriel Clark Leach, who is an attorney in Austin. Gabriel has spent more than a decade focusing on Texas Title V permits at the Environmental Integrity Project. He will provide an overview of the federal operating permit process. Then we'll hear from Dr. Inyang Uwak. Dr. Uwak is Air Alliance Houston's Research and Policy Director. She will talk about the air quality concerns with TPC Group. And finally, we will hear from Crystal Nyo, our Environmental Justice Outreach Coordinator. She will talk about the public hearing itself, what you can expect when you're there, and how you can tell your story. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I did want to mention that we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to put questions in the chat at any time, and we will either answer them in the chat or we'll address them at the end with our speakers. So now I will turn it over to our first speaker, Gabriel, who will start by talking about the Title V permit process. Thank you, Gabriel.
Hey, thanks, Jen. Happy to be a part of this, and I'm excited to share some not so exciting information about the Title V permit and permitting process. So TPC's Title V permit, or a federal operating permit, it's, as Jen said, a permit issued by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to TPC under the Federal Clean Air Act. And under the Clean Air Act, all major sources of air pollution need a Title V permit in order to legally operate. So what's a major source? A major source is an industrial source of pollution that meets any of the following three criteria. So the first is it has the potential to emit at least 100 tons per year of so-called criteria pollutants, include nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds, which create ozone, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, it's also called soot, sulfur dioxide, or lead. Second criteria is that the source has the potential to emit a hazardous air pollutant, also called an air toxic, and those include things like benzene or 1,3-butadiene, particularly bad contaminants that have terrible health consequences at a rate of more than 10 tons per year, so it's much lower, or any combination of air toxics at a rate of more than 25 tons per year. And the third criteria is you're a major source under Title V if you're also a major source under one of the Clean Air Act's so-called pre-construction permitting programs. And we are going to get into what those are. But suffice it to say, TPC's Houston plant checks all three boxes, so it needs a Title V permit to operate. What is the Title V permit? Congress created the Title V program in 1990 because the Clean Air Act is really complicated. And if you have a big source of industrial pollution like the Houston plant, the limits that it needs to comply with, the pollution control requirements, operating requirements that apply to that one source might be scattered through hundreds or thousands of pages of federal and state regulations and permitting documents, collecting dust in the archives of the TCQ. And this complexity made it difficult for courts, regulators, polluters, and the public to just understand all the things that each source, each dangerous major source had to do to comply with the law and protect public health. In particular, Congress was concerned because courts were having a lot of difficulty in enforcement cases they were getting cases, and judges were having trouble figuring out if these requirements that EPA and the public were alleging violations of even apply to the source in the first place. So the idea of Title V was to cut down on this complexity, this confusion, and inefficiency in enforcing Clean Air Act requirements by taking these requirements scattered, across the world to the four winds, and putting them into one single document. One court has called it a source-specific Clean Air Act, a Bible of Clean Air Act compliance. So these Bibles, these Title V permits, one of their purpose is just to bring together all the various requirements the major source needs to comply with to comply with the law and to protect public health. And the idea here is if you can more accurately determine the requirements that apply to a source, it'll be easier to enforce those requirements. And if they're all in one document, it'll be clear to the polluters what they have to do. So the idea is bring the requirements together, make it clear, and enforcement and compliance with the Clean Air Act requirements will improve. And on top of this sort of goal to clarify and simplify the list of requirements, Title V is meant to improve the implementation and enforcement of all these limits and requirements by improving the effectiveness of monitoring, testing, and record-keeping methods that are used to detect non-compliance with the limits. And this is sort of an underappreciated virtue of the Title V process. We all know that it's just crucial that these large sources of pollution, they have the best controls, and that the limits in their permits are super low to make sure that the public isn't being exposed to dangerous quantities of these pollutants. But these limits and these pollution control requirements don't mean a whole lot in the end if we don't actually know how well the equipment's controlling pollution, whether or not the source is actually complying with the limits in its permit. So the Title V process is also an opportunity to make sure that important emission limits are enforceable. And that's been the focus of most of my Title V permit work through the years. Another thing about the Title V permitting process, it brings together requirements, it makes this enforceable. It also provides a robust opportunity for public participation that you don't necessarily see in other kinds of permitting through the Clean Air Act. So these Title V permits, because they are supposed to be comprehensive and up-to-date Bibles of Clean Air Act compliance, they need to be updated periodically to include new requirements that come to apply to the source. And they also need to be renewed every 5 years. So every Title V permit has to be renewed every 5 years. And this meeting that we're here to talk about today, it concerns TPC's application to renew its Title V permit. And whenever a Title V permit is renewed or amended, the operator must provide public notice, and members of the public must have an opportunity to comment on the permit before it's issued, amended, or renewed. And the public comment period usually lasts for 30 days after public notice of the permit is published in a local newspaper. And comments are most often submitted as written documents. And written comments can be filed with the TCEQ through mail or online through the TCEQ's online services page. However, if enough people ask for a public meeting or an elected official requests a public hearing on a Title V permit, it's happened here, the TCEQ will hold a public hearing so that members of the public can come together and offer spoken comments on the permit into the record. And when the TCEQ approves a public hearing request, the deadline for submitting written comments is also automatically extended until the end of the public hearing. The event on April 11th will be a public hearing, and folks attending the hearing will have an opportunity to offer their remarks on the permit into the record for the TCEQ to consider before it decides whether to require changes to TPC's permit before it may be renewed. Folks attending tonight's meeting who can't make the 11th hearing can still file written comments on the permit as long as the TCEQ receives them before the end of the hearing. Before renewing the permit, the TCEQ will issue a response to all the public comments it receives during the public comment period, including those at the hearing. And this response will identify changes, if any, the agency made to the permit in response to public comments, and explain why the agency declined to make any changes that were requested. And after responding to public comments on the permit, the TCEQ will forward the permit, including the changes it made and its response to comments, to EPA for EPA's independent review. EPA then gets 45 days to look at the permit materials, and it has to object to the permit if it identifies any deficiencies. Usually these objections address monitoring shortcomings in permits because Texas's review of monitoring requirements is not very good. An EPA may also object, say, if a permit fails to include applicable limits, the permit's description of a particular requirement is too vague or it doesn't make sense, or if the permit improperly establishes confidential requirements. So the Clean Air Act says that all permit terms are public information as a matter of law, but sometimes Texas allows applicants, operators, polluters to treat operating requirements and emission limits as confidential, so the public doesn't get to see them. And when this happens, it's up to EPA to object to the permit because it's illegal. And in cases where EPA objects to the permit, EPA has to explain to the TCEQ what's wrong with the permit, and then TCEQ has to fix the permit. It has to resolve the objection before reissuing the permit. And if the TCEQ fails to fix the permit, it then becomes EPA's duty to take over the permit and fix it for the state. And that's a very significant power, but unfortunately, EPA, at least to date, has been very reluctant to do this. So we don't always get the clean fixes to serious problems the law demands. In cases where EPA doesn't object, members of the public then have a right to petition EPA to object. And this is sort of a unique wrinkle in the Title V process. We don't get this opportunity to petition EPA to object, say, to pre-construction permits. This is one of the only times that we can actually make EPA look at our complaints and respond to them. Public petitions to EPA, however, are limited to the issues and evidence that were first communicated to the TCEQ during the public comment process, unless you have a weird circumstance where the issue or evidence you want to petition on only developed after the close of the public comment period. And like I said, EPA has to respond to your petition. So they have to grant or deny each petition they receive within 60 days. And if EPA misses its deadline, as it often does, the Clean Air Act lets you sue them to force their response. They are getting better about that. And in cases where EPA grants a petition in response to a petition, the process for resolving the objection is essentially the same as when EPA objects during its 45-day review period. So I guess just in summary, Title V process brings together all the things that the source has to do to comply with the law, makes sure that all those requirements are enforceable and are actually meaningful. It allows the public to comment on the permit and whether or not it actually includes all the requirements, whether or not TPC is complying with those requirements, and any other issue that the public wants to raise about the permit. And then then the TCEQ responds, changes to the permit or doesn't. The public's satisfied with the changes, they can let it go. But if they are unsatisfied and problems are not resolved by the TCEQ and EPA does not object, then the public has the right to petition EPA to object to the permit. And that, in a nutshell, is the Title V permitting process in 10 minutes or less.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Next, we'll have Dr. Uwak speaking about the specific public health concerns with this Title V permit at TPC Group.
Thank you, Jen. I will share screen now. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen clearly? Excellent. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. So as Jen said, I'll be talking about public health concerns of the TPC Group. Let me 1 minute slide. Here we go. All right. So TPC Group is a petrochemical facility that uses raw materials to produce various products that it sells to a variety of industry, like chemical industry and those that produce rubber and plastics. They operate product terminals in Port Neches, Texas, and Lake Charles, Louisiana. And they also highly flammable compounds like butadiene, butane, and a host of others. Their East End facility is their largest operating facility. So why are we concerned with this facility? So within a 1 mile radius of this facility, we have 2,842 households, and 93% of those households are people of color. 5% identifying as Black, 84% identifying as Hispanic, and 68% are Spanish speaking, 3% are Vietnamese speaking. There are also 8 schools, 5 places of worship, and 7 parks, including the Houston Botanic Garden and Milby Park, that are within the radius or are close to this facility. And on my right-hand side, this is a picture of the fire that happened in Port Neches in 2019. So let's not forget our history here. They have a plant in Port Neches, and in 2019, they had a huge fire on and one of their pumps ruptured. And the blast that was felt from that ruptured pump, because they produce a host of flammable compounds. So a lot of those compounds, went in flames. And that blast was felt 30 miles away up to 30 miles away from that facility. And of course, there was damage to nearby homes and buildings, as well as they had to shelter in place for 2 days. The impact was felt very strongly by the surrounding community. So you think about this facility, if this should happen here in the East End facility, this number of people will be affected. So it calls for a lot of concern. Now, when you look at the health impacts of the community living within a 1 mile radius of the TPC Houston plant, you see that when you compare the rates of asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke, and you compare it to Harris County's average, you see that those 3 zip codes have higher rates of these diseases, right? For asthma, you see all 3 zip codes are higher than the Harris County average, which is in yellow here, right? Same with the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, as well as coronary heart disease.
It looks like we might have a slight technical difficulty. Give us a few seconds and we'll see if we can get Dr. Uwak back on.
Can you hear me?
You are back now.
Okay, so I would go off video and just
Yes,
use,
that will probably help.
So that way, you can hear me clearly.
I think if you start from the slide we have up on the screen, we'll be right back on track. No worries.
Perfect. Thank you. Public health impacts include, the major issue we have with TPC is flaring and emission events. And when they flare a host of compounds that are hazardous to human health. So for example, they flare a lot of volatile organic compounds. One of such is 1,3-butadiene, which they produce. And historically, when you look back at their track history on the TCQ website, we see that this compound is constantly present whenever they flare, and they flare for a number of hours, and that exposes the surrounding community to this hazardous pollutant. They also flare greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, as well as criteria air pollutants, which include carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. All these compounds are harmful to health. The criteria pollutants alone all cause respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. As you can tell from the previous slide, there are increased rates of these diseases within that zip code that is within the 1 mile radius of that facility. I decided to take just one of those compounds, which TPC produces, and also FLE, and just to give you a little bit of information about what this compound is. And this is 1,3-butadiene. 1,3-butadiene is a hazardous air pollutant, and acute human exposure to this compound by inhalation can cause irritation of the eyes, nasal passages, throat, and lungs. It can also cause blurred vision and fatigue. Now, chronic human exposure increases your risk to cardiovascular diseases and blood disorders, and it is a known human carcinogen. So you may think about this plant that produces such hazardous compounds and also flares it into the atmosphere, thereby causing the community around them to be exposed. There's a lot of need for concern. And with that, I would pass the ball to Crystal, who would tell you next steps. Share.
Thank you, Dr. Uwak. Do we have any questions before I move on? Because I know there's been a lot, especially for health related. So I'm going to pause for questions before I move on to what we can do and why your voice matters so much.
Hi, I'm a graduate student. I'm a social worker. So I want to know, like, how long does it take to collect the data after families have been exposed, and what does that look like as a larger outcome?
So it really depends, right? When you're asking about the data, is this the data following an event or in general?
Maybe an event. I know we had like an explosion not too long ago. So like, I wonder what's like a way that we can trace those patterns after like an explosion, you know?
That's a great question. So typically when an explosion like that happens, we expect, and if people come down with health effects following that, we expect that you go to your physician, your primary care physician, or ER and explain what happened, right? However, that data is not readily available or accessible to us because that's going to be hospital-acquired data. And that's why it's very important for community members to come out and speak, particularly during an event like this that we're having the permit meeting, right? To speak up and share their stories following such an explosion, their own personal experiences. I think that it's a very powerful message because going to the health department or the emergency room to collect that data, that's confidential information, right? So it's not readily available to the general public. However, in this situation, the public has an opportunity to speak up and share, their experiences, their personal experiences following an event like that. I don't know if that helps answer your question. Jenny, do you want to chime in?
No, I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Sandra, you referenced an explosion. Are you referring to an event at TPC Group or a different explosion event?
I'm not sure. It's something that happened a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So I thought that might be what you were referencing. A lot of these facilities, I will be honest, use names that are intentionally ambiguous and vague. The explosion I think you're remembering is from ITC. And this facility is TPC. And I say that because they know that it's confusing, and they stand for something. They're acronyms that have a meaning. The ITC Deer Park explosion is the one you may be thinking of. TPC did have an explosion, as Dr. Uwak explained. That happened in Port Neches, not here in Houston. So just to clarify those two events. TPC, however, as we understand it from an investigation from the EPA, has some of the same concerns of potential safety risk. They have not had an event of that kind at our Houston plant, thank goodness. They do have significant flares. We saw some flaring just a few months ago around the Christmas holidays, and it flared for at least a full day. But just to clarify, the explosion at TPC happened in Port Neches. It didn't happen here. I just wanted to clarify that for everyone's information. And then Gabriel, you came off mute too to respond to Sandra's question.
Right. Just real quickly, even so, whenever there's an illegal sort of upset emission event, whenever you see flaring, it doesn't have to be an explosion, but just whenever there's some sort of breakdown, startup, or shutdown, which results in a significant quantity of unauthorized pollution, these sources are required to report that to the TCEQ within 24 hours, I think. And it's not always accurate, but this sort of publicly available reporting emission information, it's available through the TCEQ's website, and it's actually a resource that they don't have in a lot of other states. So it's not necessarily well implemented. Sources aren't necessarily well regulated in Texas, but we do have information when there are reported illegal emission events, and they're available through the TCEQ's emission events website.
And Susan, I noticed in the chat you referenced the major flare day, the day before the holidays. Dr. Uwak and her team wrote an excellent report on the amount of excess emissions, and we will find that and put it in the chat as Crystal is giving her presentation. Same thought.
Alrighty, y'all. Can y'all see? Can I get a thumbs up and we can see my screen? Perfect. Thank you. All right. Great questions. And I can't wait to keep, please also have write these questions down when you have to make your public comment as well. But to give a quick, another emphasis on the area at a glance of 1 mile radius at, not Texas Ontario, I changed that, but at TPC Group, the race in this community is Hispanic, white, Black, and Asian. And so when we talk about environmental justice, these facilities and these petrochemical facilities, air polluting facilities are always bombarding in communities of color. And so that's why we focus on environmental justice and defining that and wanting to have these facilities be removed, because they will always end up being in the communities of color. So language is spoken, same thing. We have English, Spanish, and Vietnamese speakers within 1 mile radius of TPC Group. And we want to focus on language justice. So thankfully at the meeting, there is going to be Spanish interpretation available for most of the TCEQ meetings. But we strive as well to, when we hand out information to community members, to when we're doing that outreach and letting community members know that there's a permit renewal or any sort of industry coming into a community, we will have that translated in English and Spanish. In Vietnamese and Spanish at Airlines Houston. But yeah, within that mile, there's 67% Spanish speakers, and then also like around 3% Vietnamese speaking. But that's really to show that disparity of like that language gap that we are trying to bridge. And then I'm repeating what Dr. Enying said as well about the plant being close to 8 schools, 5 places of worship, and 7 parks to show that vulnerability. There's a lot of communities that are vulnerable and very close to this facility, this petrochemical plant. So to explain who TCEQ is and who you will be seeing on Thursday if you attend the permit hearing is Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They are Texas state regulators, and they regulate facilities that are trying to plan and they are responsible for the planning, permitting, and monitoring of environmental projects. So these petrochemical plants, they have to get a permit from TCEQ before they can build. So TCEQ will monitor the air, land, and water permits. And so ours specifically will be talking about the air. When you come to, so now on Thursday, there is going to be a permit hearing, and I want to review the process before I tell you like dates and give you all those details. The meeting on Thursday is going to start at 7, so I recommend coming around at 6:45 because you'll register to speak and submit comments, and then you'll sign up to TCEQ's mailing list, because when you give a comment, that's how they will respond to you. So they'll mail you back a response on what they plan to do with this, or what, if they accepted this permit or not, or if they're going to renew the permit or not. And as I mentioned, there is interpretation. So that's also the time for you to get your devices. And then also like let other people know if they need interpretation devices. Once they start the meeting, you have 30 minutes at the very beginning to walk up to a microphone and directly ask questions to the applicant. So in this case, TPC Group, or you can ask questions to TCQ staff themselves. Some of the questions that I typically will always ask is like, how have you been able to support community? Have you engaged with community? Why are there not many people that are representative of the community here? And so I usually ask those questions about engagement. And then for the next hour, you'll have a formal permit hearing, meaning that will be on record. Any comments that you say that's going to be on record, that's when they'll have to respond to you. After, like when they send you a response in the mail, these are based off of the formal comments, and you have 5 minutes to share your testimony and statement. And so I highly encourage that even if you ask your questions and you went up to the mic the first 30 minutes, you should come back, because that will be on record and you're sharing that, hey, I don't want you in this community, or just anything else that you would want them to respond to. This is the perfect time within that 5 minutes to share. And then after the permit hearing, that's when they'll take about 30 days to send you something in the mail about what their decision was and to answer your questions. All right, so to help with how to shape your testimony, this is just going to be a sample, but I write, I live near TPC Group and am stating my opposition to renewing this permit. And that's when you can add your personal story. How has it affected your family's health? What have you noticed in your community? And how has that has affected you? You can have some of our talking points. I will share that in the chat soon, but there are a couple of talking points that we have. So sharing what Dr. Uwak was mentioning, that there's a lot of emittance of volatile organic compounds and greenhouse gases, and all of these are carcinogens and are carcinogenic and can affect someone's life long term. And then we can also write about the EJ, that kind of EJ concern, or that environmental justice concerns about how close it is to all of vulnerable populations and affecting the environment. And then you can finish up with the conclusion about what you want TCEQ to do. You can say, we don't want them to give that permit. Alrighty, so the TPC Group in-person meeting is going to be on Thursday, April 11th, starting at 7 p.m. And it's going to be at Raul School for Success, like Jennifer had mentioned. And then that is these is for you to screenshot if you like. But if you are not able to attend in person, you can submit a comment online. And I have a QR code for y'all to scan. Once you scan that QR code, you would have to type in the permit number, which is 5198. And it's gonna take you to a different screen, so you're just gonna have to click the first box, once you type that in. But yeah, they're gonna ask you for your contact information because all of their responses, they have to mail to your residence. So they will ask for your name, email, and your residential address. So I'm gonna take a moment on this if you want to scan it with your phone before I move on to the next slide. I think some of you are looking at your phone, so I want to make sure, let me know if you have any questions. And like if it's giving you any trouble.
Hi, I'm pulling it up, and when I put in the permit number, it says that there's an error, permit number not found.
Double turn. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 1598. Let me fix
Oh.
this. I'm gonna change it. Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna change it right now though to make sure. Thank you. Thank you for trying, y'all.
So when you follow that to 1598, you get a chart, a table with a bunch of rows. I think our row is the one without a docket number. I think those other ones are for like enforcement proceedings. So there's the third row. If you click 1598, that should get you to where you need to be.
Crystal, can I still share screen and I'll show everybody what Gabriel's referring to? This won't take but a second. Here we go. So once you type in that number, this is what Gabriel's referring to, this list. And so Gabriel, you said it's this one with no docket number, the one with the blank.
I think that's right.
And so you click that permit number. It means
That's right.
So then you click that and then you get to the screen for entering your comments. So look for the one with the missing docket. Okay, back to you, Crystal.
And that's it. I just wanted to plug
Oh.
in. I wanted to join our newsletter and follow us on the socials, but that's how we can stay contacted. And especially if you sign up for our newsletter as well and you put your email and your zip code, we have something called airmail that allows us to know when facilities are asking TCQ for a permit, and especially if it affects your area, then we do a targeted newsletter towards your community so that you can stay informed. So I'll leave that up, but then we are open for questions.
Absolutely. And we are a small enough group. Feel free to come off mute and ask your question. Or if you'd rather type your question in the chat. And before we end, I will share an email address you can send questions to after this webinar if it comes to you later. So this isn't the last time you can reach out to us for assistance between now and Thursday. So any questions or comments to share about TPC Group and their federal operating permit hearing on Thursday?
So this is mainly for people in the neighborhood. Because I'm not in that neighborhood, I'm always concerned about the air
Well,
quality.
not necess-
in
I
general.
wouldn't say that, I wouldn't say you have to be living in the neighborhood. I've encouraged others that, I always say, especially as it pertains to some of the flaring events that they've had in the past few years. I mean, those reach all the way over to the west side. Air pollution does not stay put in one zip code. And,
Right.
Community getting sick here, which is, I'm half a mile away from it. you know, is a detriment to all of us, especially as it pertains to young children in the area that, you know, are having to lug around their breathing treatments that are getting triggered by facilities like this that just are not being held accountable. So I would say to that, you don't have to live in the area. You live in the city. You're concerned about the city. You know, we were just named one of the dirtiest cities in the country, and that's partially why.
Thanks. And this is recorded, so how can I get the recording? Because I was a little bit late.
Great question. We will post this recording sometime tomorrow. We have to download and then we make sure that there are closed captions included. And you can access the recording as well as our materials about this permit. We have talking points, we have comment templates on the link that was just posted to the chat. So the recording won't be there tonight. Give us until tomorrow, but there are already resources on that link. Like I said, talking points, much of what Dr. Uek spoke about, guidance on how to give comments, what Crystal spoke about are already there for you or others. If you know people who are not able to make it tonight, you can share this information with them as well. Tomorrow, the recording will be up also.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may also to that point, invite your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues to come and make comments. We don't know exactly how this may turn out. Usually, truthfully speaking, you know, it's very rare that TCEQ does reject permits, but it seems after today going to city council and getting the attention of the mayor around the specific facility and then looking to also submit comments. You know, we do use this as ammunition as we, you know, continue with trying to enact better laws and legislation around these types of facilities from continuing to pollute. So we appreciate you being here today and also continuing those efforts as they pertain to the public hearing on Thursday.
Are there any other questions or comments while we're here? Well, I will wrap us up by just reiterating the details, and I will put them in the chat as well. The permit hearing on the TPC Group's federal operating permit is on Thursday. I put the pronunciation there for everybody, Raul Izaguirre, Schools for Success. And it will be Thursday at 7 o'clock, as Crystal advised. Arrive about 6:45 to 7. And the first half hour will be Q&A. You will be able to ask questions as well. You can ask questions not only of TCEQ, but also of TPC Group, who will have a representative present also. And then there will be the public comment section. If you need any assistance in preparing your questions or your comments, you can reach out to us at our general info account, which is this email. There we go. And we will be monitoring this account over the next 2 days. If you send us a note and you would like some assistance, we will follow up. Also, at the permit meeting, you will see Crystal and some of our other team members who will be present to also assist you at that time in asking questions or making a comment. So we are here as your resource between now and Thursday and on Thursday night. And as I've been speaking, it looks like Susan, you have a question for us.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't get myself off mute.
That's all right.
We are having quite the thunder right now. I have a question. I went to the HCAP meeting last, I guess, I think they're every other month. So I guess it was 2 months ago. And I asked TPC some questions about their expansion permit. And the person, which was approved, if I understand correctly, by the EPA, and TPC noted that they had made some negotiations with area organizations about how they operated moving forward. Do you know anything about that?
We do. We were one of the organizations that were part of that lawsuit. Gabriel, can we speak to that in this setting, or should we hold off on that?
Yeah, well, we can talk. It's not a confidential settlement, so
Okay,
we oppose the expansion project, Sierra Club, Environmental Integrity Project in Airlines Houston, and we negotiated a settlement whereby TPC agreed to install some new new advanced fence line monitoring, and make some improvements to its processes to cut down on emission events in exchange for the parties withdrawing their opposition to the permits. So those construction permits were issued by the TCEQ and will be incorporated into TPC's Title V permit as part of this sort of renewal. As part of that settlement, we can't encourage you to challenge that incorporation, but it's a live issue, as is any issue you have with the permit.
I will only add one more piece on the settlement, if memory serves, was a requirement that TPC provide some additional reporting to the community, which they do not always routinely and regularly do, in terms of their impact to the environment from the fence line monitoring. And then one last item, though, those parties, meaning Air Alliance Houston and the others, cannot expressly comment on the expansion permit. The Title V permit is uniquely different from that expansion permit. And so we do have the right to respond to the Title V. And of course, everyone on this call, other than those of us who work for the organizations, can speak to both. There's a bit of a gray and a nuance, but it does not keep us from pushing back on and expecting better of the Title V permit.
Thank you. I thought that was a interesting comment, and it struck me as I wanted to know more about it. I mean, TPC is certainly a real problem, and have been for a very long time. And yeah, I think there needs to be some way, and I live in 77017, and Jennifer, we know one another. And I don't know how to organize people here, my neighbors and everything. I know everybody's concerned about it, but people are busy and working, and I think it's, difficult to get people engaged. But I would ask that the organizations with the resources, anything that you can do to help us with that would be very much appreciated. And I appreciate this session tonight. Yeah, because I think this is an important, I don't expect anything, but I think it's important.
Valeria, I see your hand. What question do you have?
Yes, and I joined a little late, so I'm sorry if this was already addressed, but do you know if there's going to be interpreters at the hearing, and if so, what languages? And if there were a person that would want to do public comment in Spanish, would they need like somebody to go up with them?
I can answer that question. So Spanish is going to be available. I'm still working on Vietnamese, but Spanish is going to be available, and the person that's giving comments can say it in Spanish, and the interpreter will come up and interpret for us. So yeah, we always encourage community members to speak the language that they're most comfortable in. So everybody should feel empowered so they can speak in the language that they're comfortable with. And yeah, TCEQ will have it covered. And any other questions?
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us again this evening. I want to especially thank our three speakers. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your information with us tonight. Again, the details of the meeting are on Thursday. There's a link in the chat where you can find more information from Air Alliance Houston, talking points, comment templates, a link to the actual permit notification to confirm the permit number and how to upload comments. But most importantly, our email address. If you have a question between now and Thursday, do reach out to us, and then we will see you hopefully at the permit meeting on Thursday, and we can assist you in asking your questions or making your comments at that time as well. So I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and we'll see you on Thursday. Thank you all again so much. I hope you'll sign up for our newsletter. That way you will hear about other future permit opposition work just like this one. This won't be the last one. There are more coming. And if you would like to get engaged in that work, you will hear from us by signing up to our newsletter. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Dr. Uwak. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Rika. By the way, Pojankowski behind the scenes, who's been managing our tech. Thank you as well. You didn't see her or hear her, but she was organizing everything from behind the scenes. We wouldn't have had this meeting without her. Thank you all so much and have a good evening. Bye-bye.